Welcome to Doing the Work, a Naples integrated recovery podcast. My name is Brian, and this space is for anyone who's tired of surviving the same emotional and behavioral loops, whether that's anxiety, trauma, addiction, or problems in your relationships. Around here, we cut the surface level advice, no sugarcoating, no platitudes, no bumper sticker wisdom. We focus on clarity, responsibility, emotional discipline, and the courage to look at yourself honestly so that you can stop repeating the same old patterns and start living with intention instead of reaction. Let's get into it. Good morning, everybody. Today is another full rewrite because yesterday I recorded this episode, played it back to myself, and said I've done it again with too heavy neurobiology. So changed it up, and I wanted people to know that this episode was inspired by clients that I worked with this week, a couple that I worked with this week. It seems like my practice is turning into this niche where I'm working with a lot of individuals and couples who are in long-term recovery. They are sober, but they still find themselves in some stuck pattern or something in their life that they still cannot change. And for many of them, they don't want to be involved in peer-led programs because sometimes they are really more helpful with building a foundation but not working at the deeper stuff. So I'm going to give you an example coming from this disagreement between husband and wife, and talk a little bit about what we addressed in that session and build off of that from there. And I just had so much empathy for the husband in this relationship because I know what he is experiencing. And so the topic today is about disproportionate or disproportional upset responses, being right in a situation, and how that can really be isolating. And so before I talk about the thing that they were working on and give you a few examples from my own history, I want to set this up. Think about, have you ever been in some form of, whether this is at the DMV or Publix, I've used like a 10 items or less example before, but so have you ever been in a grocery store and watched like a 10 item or less register lane that is open and not a single person is in this lane? Meanwhile, everybody has a cart that is full and it is backed halfway up through the building, and there's an employee at the 10 item or less lane who's like reading a book or scrolling on TikTok and like pointing at the sign like, nope, not my responsibility. And then suddenly there is a disproportionately furious internal reaction. Maybe you start building a legal case in real time, and the rage is not about groceries, but it's about being trapped in a civilization where it seems like nobody gives a shit. Now, I used to run anger management groups, and a lot of those clients were court mandated, and often anger management treatment focuses on things that are really obvious. You know, the people that are screaming, having a road rage incident involving a gun, threatening a judge, punching a wall. But today I'm talking about the controlled version, where a person may be calm enough that they keep their voice at a reasonable volume, but internally, the courtroom is open. The problem here is the line is inefficient. The process doesn't make any sense. The employee is really checked out. The system doesn't make any sense. And still, the reaction is becoming way bigger than that moment. because the sign says this, the employee says that, the policy says one thing, the process does another. Nobody's taking ownership, and somehow the mess is now being pushed back onto you. So you start asking questions if you've got this prosecutor, which I'm very guilty of. I'm going to give some examples a little bit later. But have you ever asked questions like, let me get this right. So this is actually happening. Everyone here is seeing this, correct? You're part of this, and this makes sense to you. And on paper, those are valid questions. But in the courtroom, it can sound like contempt. And that's the problem, that you can be factually correct and still be the problematic person in the room. So the couple that inspired this episode, they were talking about an appliance delivery situation that from last week. The delivery guy showed up. There had been some sort of a clerical error in the paperwork, and the employee made essentially no visible attempt to solve the problem whatsoever, shrugged and said some version of, nope, can't do it, and left for the next job. And add in an additional layer of frustration. I think they said it was like the second or third time that there was some sort of an issue with this appliance delivery or with the company. Either way, this couple had ended up in an argument because he had did some variant of this rapid fire of questions, and his wife was trying to smooth things over and give him a different perspective that maybe he wasn't ready for. Their conflict escalated because he was agitated at the inefficiency and the I don't give a shit attitude, and her response landed to him as dismissive of it, which made him more upset, and then the two of them had really escalated. Now, think about it. If you were in this situation, most people would probably be pretty frustrated that you arranged your schedule. Maybe you took time off of work to do this. You do your part. You wait. You know, they always give you like a 4-hour window or an 8-hour window as if everybody just has 8 hours to be hanging around at home. And then someone shows up, finds a little minor barrier, takes no ownership, no problem solving skills, and goes, nope, can't do it. And now you're the one on the hook holding the mess. And for some people, that might just be annoying or frustrating. I'm going to use my partner as an example in this episode because he does not have the internal reactions that I do. With a situation like this, he'd go, oh, well, this is kind of inconvenient because, I took off of work to be here for this delivery. Like a sane, rational response. But for people who have addictive histories, or if they are high functioning nervous system, this feels like psychological sandpaper, because the appliance stops being about the appliance. Now the delivery guy is carrying every passive coworker, every useless agency, every broken system, every person who has ever shrugged while a mess rolled downhill onto somebody else. And then the whole scene becomes evidence of a larger pattern that people dodge ownership. The system kind of shrugs like, nobody can really do anything with that. And then a competent person that's present absorbs the cost. Now, maybe it sounds like I'm being dramatic, but it's not dramatic if you've lived inside that nervous system. One of the thoughts that shows up for me is because I work with a lot of clients who are highly driven, or they have, addictive wiring that really prioritizes efficiency, staying busy. Some of them have ADHD. And a lot of these people that I work with, they run very successful businesses. They are high functioning professionals, doctors, you name it. And a theme from a lot of them is that many of them have said some variant of like, I'm not even really trying that hard. I'm at like 70% effort and I run laps around people. Now, this thought can be dangerous because sometimes it is arrogant, but other times they're probably observing something real, that there are systems where low ownership gets rewarded. There are workplaces where passive people survive for years because somebody else keeps compensating. When I was a police officer, I can't even count how many lazy cops I worked with. They might actually work harder to convince somebody not to do a report. They'll spend an hour convincing somebody not to do a report, and the report would have actually taken like 6 minutes. There are customer service environments where the language is polished, but the service is just trash. There are institutions where everybody knows that the process makes absolutely no sense. And in many situations, nobody has the authority, energy, or backbone to change it, or desire. And after you have had enough of that, you can get to a place where you start using yourself as the measuring stick for humanity, because then maybe a calm person looks lazy, or a slow person looks pathetic, or average functioning feels like it's morally offensive. And if the work is mediocre, but then someone flips an iPad around after pouring a coffee and it says, would you like to give 15, 20, 25, 35%, or your firstborn, will take any of those, something in you recoils, because the mind makes a value judgment before you have even caught it. The nervous system reacts to the mismatch that there was zero effort and an expectation of reward between service language and then the actual service, entitlement versus excellence. And a reaction like that can feel like realism in that moment. And over time, if reinforced with that loop in your brain over and over and over again, this can turn into contempt. Now, I told this couple, I told this guy, I have so much empathy. Like, I feel like I really understand you and your anger in the situation. And I said, but as this had escalated between the two of them, I said, man, it really also reminds me of this scene that I'm going to play from the movie The Big Lebowski. And since you can't watch the video, in it, I'm just going to let you know what it is that they are bowlers, and somebody steps over the line, which would mean that it's a foul and the score does not count. The guy refuses, and it escalates to the point that John Goodman pulls out a gun at the bowling alley. And I'm going to play that for you real quick.
Walter.
Fucking dog has fucking papers. Over the line!
Huh?
I'm sorry, Smokey. You were over the line. That's a foul.
Bullshit. Mark at 8, dude.
Excuse me. Mark at 0. Next frame.
Bullshit, Walter. Mark at 8, dude.
Smokey, this is not Nam. This is bowling. There are rules.
Hey, Walter, come on. It's just, hey, man, it's Smokey. So his toe slipped over a little, It's just a game, man.
This is a league game. This determines who enters the next round robin. Am I wrong?
Yeah, but I wasn't...
Am I wrong?
Yeah, but I wasn't over. Give me the marker, dude. I'm marking an 8.
Smokey, my friend, you're entering a world of pain.
He reached into his bowling bag and just pulled out a pistol.
Walter, man.
You mark that frame in 8, you're entering a world of pain.
I'm not...
A world of pain.
Look, dude, this is your partner.
Has the whole world gone crazy? Am I the only one around here who gives a shit about the rules? Mark at 0.
They're calling the cops, man. Put the piece away.
Mark at 0.
Walter, put the piece away.
Walter?
You think I'm fucking around here? Mark at 0.
All right, it's fucking 0. You happy, you crazy fuck?
The league game, Smokey.
Well, wouldn't it be great if the nervous system actually calmed down that fast? It wouldn't. But we laughed about that clip from that because it really fits. Like, am I the only one that sees any of this? Am I the only one that gives a fuck about the rules? And so the challenge is here, recovery culture often flattens this. AA would probably frame this. I've heard numerous people say that's alcoholic thinking, or that's resentment or ego or a character defect. And it makes sense why those frameworks exist. Some people who are addicted do externalize blame for everything. Some people with addictions are manipulative, grandiose, dishonest, entitled, or a perpetual victim. And accountability is really important. Those programs absolutely help people build accountability. Humility matters. Recovery absolutely requires that people confront a destructive ego structure. AA saved my life, so I'm not interested in bashing and attacking, but the critique is valid because it can become over-sloganized. Using verbiage like character defect can be useful if it points somebody back to accountability, but it gets sloppy if it becomes the only explanation. Now, at the same time, I also understand why a sloppy explanation is used, because to say something like resentment will kill you probably lands better or makes more sense than a 40-minute explanation about sympathetic activation, compensatory control, attachment injury, and dopaminergic reinforcement, right? A room full of actively addicted people are going to be glossed over, and they will have missed any of that if I start talking about psychodynamic neurobiological explanations while they're in the middle of chaos. Now, for me, I find this kind of stuff frustrating, especially if it comes with like pseudo humility and spiritual superiority and simplistic answers to complex situations and complex problems. But I digress. Trying to give you a little bit of an explanation. It's not always a character defect thing, because sometimes someone is dealing with a situation where a person's being arrogant. Sometimes resentment in a moment is exactly what's needed to tell you that you have to do something different, like set a boundary or leave. And in some cases, we are feeding contempt because contempt feels better than being helpless in a situation where you have no power. Or for some people with addiction histories, their nervous system has been trained to scan for problems and to scan for collapse, especially if they came from a household of dysfunction. So they're not just mad that the delivery guy left without leaving the appliance. They're reacting to a familiar pattern that somebody has dropped the ball, shrugged, and go, not my job. And the cost rolls downhill. They've seen that pattern in families, jobs, systems, institutions, relationships, and recovery. And by the time that they are standing at the return counter or dealing with the delivery driver, they're not just dealing with that situation, they're dealing with every time that they have had to overfunction because somebody else underfunctioned. But that does not excuse the contempt, but it explains why the reaction internally feels so much bigger than that moment. So that is the conversation that recovery culture can miss when it too quickly reaches for a slogan. The issue is rarely that this is just a character defect, I'm impatient. No, your body is treating inefficiency like danger, disrespect, and abandonment all at once, and then the mind is building a legal case around that. That makes a hell of a lot more sense than moralizing somebody. Now, some people are fast because they are skilled. Some people's brains move fast because going slowly feels unsafe. If you worked in an environment where people constantly dropped the ball around you, or you grew up in a situation like that, and you were the one that always paid the cost, then your body learns to scan, and you start seeing problems before they even happen. You start to notice things that are missing, you anticipate the collapse, and you compensate before anybody even asked you to. From the outside, that might look like somebody who is just, really got their shit together and that they are very disciplined. But internally, it's like being in a building where every single fire alarm is going off at the same time. And so when the employee shrugs and the system contradicts itself or the process makes no sense, this person's body does not read this as a minor inconvenience. It reads it as the beginning of an old pattern. Someone has failed, and now I have to carry the mess. The moment in the present is small, but the pattern activated is old. And once that pattern is active, now the danger is that peace becomes conditional. The environment has to function correctly before that person's nervous system can relax. So the slow employee activates you. The incompetence activates you. The poor communication activates you. And the lack of ownership activates you. But the problem, now you're psychologically dependent on an external person being competent in order for you to stay internally regulated. And that's an impossible bargain with reality, because reality contains inefficiency, mediocrity, passivity, uneven competence, bureaucracy, and human limitations. And the older that I get, I realize that a lot of my suffering comes rarely from the inconvenience and more about my own inability to metabolize inefficiency without turning it into a psychological indictment of human beings. And so I'm going to go back and give you some examples from my past and present. And one that really captures this is when I worked at the Department of Children and Families. Now, at that time, you had two choices for getting around to see the kids that you had to see to do the investigations. You can use this 15-year-old state car, like a 2003 Ford Focus with 300,000 miles on it. You might go to a bad area and risk whether or not it starts. No cell phone service out there. So yeah, that's the state car, or you can use your personal car and then you can be reimbursed for the mileage. But this is a government agency, so do you think it's as easy as that? Of course it's not. Right now, I've been trying to get a hold of the IRS to file my 2025 taxes, which I late filed. I have not been able to get through to the IRS for 3 weeks. 3 weeks I have been calling almost every day and cannot get through to a human being. Now, back to the DCF mileage sheet. So with this, I was required to put the date, times, and point A, point B. That makes sense. I'm not even arguing that process. The issue is that this sheet then went to an accountant in Tallahassee who would then review it and kick it back if it didn't match something that they were seeing. So I might write that the trip was 5.1 miles, and somebody else in Tallahassee looks it up and goes, I'm showing on Google Maps that that's 4.7 there, buddy. So it gets kicked back. And in a government bureaucracy, the kickback means that this now has disappeared into like a black hole for 2 weeks or sitting on someone's desk for a month. And the review process doesn't account for actual conditions of the day, like maybe there is traffic being rerouted because of an accident, or maybe the route required a detour. Maybe Google Maps showed a version that was different than the actual drive required. None of that matters. And you'd think maybe it would make sense for this person in Tallahassee to just make a phone call and say, hey, I'm showing a discrepancy. 2-second conversation, we move on with our life. Nope, none of that matters. The number's off, so now the reimbursement is delayed. And at one point, I was like 3 or 4 months behind on mileage sheets that I would submit them timely, on time, and then they'd get kicked back for something like this and never reimbursed, and just another thing on the plate. And so at one point, out of frustration, and honestly with my law enforcement mindset of like, I don't give a fuck about this organization. I'm a cop. I used to be a cop. I don't care about DCF. I emailed this person's supervisor because in Outlook, it shows a chain of command, bean counter 1 in Tallahassee, and this is their supervisor. So I emailed the supervisor in Tallahassee, and it basically said something like, let me get this right. The taxpayers of Florida and the Department of Children and Families are paying me $20 an hour to do a mileage sheet. Then they're paying an accountant $25 an hour to review it for errors. Kick it back to me. Have me fix it again at $20 an hour. Let it sit in cyberspace for 2 weeks, all because you found an error that saved 60 cents. Am I getting that correct? Now, as you can imagine, that email was forwarded from that supervisor to their supervisor, which then went to a director in Tallahassee, that then went to a director in Naples, with the basic message of, what the fuck is this child protective investigator's problem? Who does he think he is sending this email? And here's the problem that matters. If you remove ego from this for a second, there was absolutely nothing illogical about what I asked. The absurdity of this situation is real. The amount of labor being spent to correct a mileage discrepancy that is worth less than $1 is real. The inefficiency and the burn here is ridiculous, yet socially and organizationally, I was the problem. And I was working with an AA sponsor at the time who said something else, some variant of like, yeah, that's ego. Who do you think you are to send an email like that? And there's something in that. The delivery matters. My contempt and my tone was bad. That's true. The defiance definitely needed to be addressed because I had this like, I'm going to make everybody look and see how stupid this is energy. And that really needed to be examined. But also, who was I? I was the person who was being asked to absorb the cost of an absurd system while also still trying to track down kids and do the child protective investigations in the field. This is where the nuance lives, because if we call it only ego, then we miss the whole system. And if we call out only the system, then we also are missing the contempt in my tone, the self-importance that leaked through. The wound, the pain for me was being trapped inside stupidity while being expected to also respect chain of command. And that matters because it captures the emotional charge underneath moments like this. Now, I wish that I could tell you that I have evolved so much and do so much better, but the sad thing is that this DCF story was about 6 or 7 years ago, and to this day, doing the work for me includes the fact that I still have this exact conversation with myself, and some days I still do not do any better. Oh, God, I hate that. I hate that, but I also tell on myself, and I think I try to humanize that for clients. So if you saw the picture on my website for this, it will explain with this next story. A few months ago, my partner and I had an identical situation at Lowe's, and it involved buying something that could supposedly be cut to size. So there is a plank of wood, a sign right under it that says, "We cut this here in the store." And so I take it to the checkout, I buy it, then I wheel it back to the saw area for it to be cut. Takes, of course, 15 minutes to find an employee, but that's okay. It's good for me to wait. Employee finally comes back and goes, "No, we don't cut that." So I said some version of, hold on a second, let me get that right. There was a sign exactly where I purchased this item that says that you could cut this to size. I then took said item to the checkout where I purchased it, and now you are telling me you cannot cut it. Am I getting all that right? And he's like, he leans into his witness microphone. Yes, that's correct. So, okay. Okay, well, that's that. So I take it back to the checkout area to return it, where they go, hold on, man. No, you can't return that here. You got to go back over to line 37 for the returns. And this is where the flip switched for me, because first it was like minor frustration, then absurdity, and then my internal prosecuting attorney woke up and said, let me grab this microphone. Let me just clarify. Is this correct? What I'm seeing right now, this is actually happening. You are witnessing this. You are part of this. You think that this is okay. Am I getting all of this right? Now, I probably didn't have quite that level of intensity because I didn't yell at anybody. That is important. The police did not get called. There was no screaming or threats or I'm going to burn the building down. But there was unquestionably contempt and disgust in my tone when I asked these questions. And my poor partner was like trying to hide behind a plant, just so embarrassed to be present with somebody that was having this interaction. And that's the part that I hope makes this clinically useful for you, because in my head, I was trying to make room for someone to admit that this process did not make any sense. But what leaked through underneath the words, which were all correct, was disbelief, superiority, contempt, pressure, disgust. And so even though I wasn't screaming, the interaction did not feel like a collaborative encounter. Now think about my client that I had mentioned. Him and his wife had a argument about it because he felt like she's not even on my side. She's on the other person's side. But so the employee at Lowe's is, first of all, has no emotional stakes in this whatsoever. The employee hears, you are now standing trial for the incompetence of this system that you are part of. And this employee has no authority, no ownership. They can't do anything to change where the checkout or the returns are. And probably they don't even have the nervous system capacity for a confrontation like this with a psycho like me. This guy's probably dealing with 5 of his own fires in his life. Like, how am I going to provide for my kids and purchase this medicine while I'm making $16 an hour at Lowe's, right? But here, I am the center of the universe, and you're on trial for my frustration. So I'm highly verbal, analytical, over-focused on semantic accuracy. And I say to my partner, like, was I wrong? Did anything that I just said, was any of that untrue? But everybody else in the room is reacting instead to my tone, intensity, the prosecutorial energy, the contempt leakage, and nervous system pressure. And my poor partner's embarrassment does not mean that I was factually wrong. It meant that my nervous system had escalated this situation into a moral confrontation where everybody else was just trying to survive a annoying retail interaction. And that is painful for me to admit, that that's what recovery 7 years sober looks like for this person, and why this pattern is so difficult to interrupt, because I was factually correct. The problem was the nervous system cost and the relational cost. Now, in AA or in a million self-help books, you will hear a line somewhere close to, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Or do you want to be right or do you want to be free? And I have mixed feelings about that. First of all, if you ask most people, they'll say both, right? But there is truth in it that being right can become its own drug. It gives you certainty. It gives you superiority. It gives your nervous system a clean little hit of, I'm seeing this clearly, and obviously everybody else is insane. And sometimes I am seeing it clearly. The system is not making any sense. This employee doesn't care they're checked out. This process is absurd. The problem is what being right costs you. Because you can prove the point, you can expose the absurdity, you can make the argument, and then walk away for the rest of the day activated, tense, full of contempt, disconnected from your partner. You're definitely not going to do whatever project that you guys had planned to do because you've ruined the day with your asshole energy, and still dealing with the same situation. You're always going to run into the appliance delivery problem, another return counter, another mileage sheet, or another grocery line. And that is where this AA line has some value. Do you want to be right or happy? At some point, you have to ask, what did being right in this situation actually afford me here? But what it misses is that some people use this to shut down accurate perception. They might use it like, stop noticing what's broken. Instead, why don't you notice what's true? Stop being so difficult. Well, that does not work for people who had to fight hard to trust their own read on reality. So a better question might be, can I be right in this situation without needing the universe to confess that and for me to win the courtroom argument that I created? Can I handle what needs to be handled, still see the absurdity, maybe make a complaint if I have to, set a boundary, leave a store, not return back there anymore, not leave a review like I'm Karen, change companies if I need to, and then still keep my nervous system intact? That is real work. Being right is useful when it is helping you act cleanly, but being right also becomes addictive if it gives you permission to marinate in contempt. So that line, am I getting it right? Is this actually happening? This is a high-functioning hyperactivation moment. You're trying to force reality to admit how absurd it is. You're trying to recruit witnesses. You are saying, can someone please just confirm that I'm not crazy? Can you confirm that this doesn't make any sense and we're all seeing the same thing? The problem is that the emotional delivery communicates something sharper, and it sounds something like, you're part of what's wrong with this world. The plywood return is now carrying 15 years of accumulated frustration. The nervous system is not responding to a plywood situation, but instead to every incompetence, passivity, and pass the buck behavior that I've ever dealt with in my life. That's why there's the disproportionate reaction. The average person, my partner, is annoyed for 30 seconds and then they move on with their day and they just go on to the gardening thing. And if you have a hyper-activated person, then they experience physiological activation, fixation, rumination, moral outrage, contempt, and urgency to confront the absurdity. And personally, I think that if you just call that alcoholic thinking, that really misses how complex this situation is. But here's the other thing. That's not a pleasant way to live. It feels powerful for a moment, and it's exhausting fast. The uncomfortable thing is that anger gives you something. It wakes you up. It gives you energy. It gives you a target. It gives your mind a clean story. I see the problem, they don't. And it can help when you are helpless. But there is a charge in carrying righteous anger. You might feel sharper, more awake, more certain for a minute. That disgust feels like power, but this pattern can become addictive because then your brain starts always scanning for the next example, the next lazy coworker, the next checked out employee, the next stupid policy or broken system or person moving too slow or organization wasting $70 to save 60 cents. You'll never run out of material. The world will always hand you more evidence. The question is whether you want to spend your life collecting it, because underneath the contempt is usually something that is harder to feel, like, I hate seeing chaos and nobody taking ownership, or sometimes I feel trapped inside a system that doesn't work, or I can't relax because everything feels half-assed, or I feel like I'm alone in carrying this stuff. And those things are harder to sit with because they have less power in them. They sound exposed, maybe even silly if you say them out loud. And contempt solves that for a moment, because it turns I feel trapped into everybody around me is a fucking idiot. It turns helplessness into judgment. And if you are fast, verbal, and competent, then you can build a beautiful legal case around that judgment. You can explain why the system is stupid. You can explain why the employee should have done better. You can explain the process is wasting time and money. You may be right. The cost is that everyone around you feels the disgust before they have even heard the argument. And that includes your partner, that includes your kids, that includes employees who have no authority or ability to change anything. It includes people who are just standing near the blast radius of your disgust. And the answer to all of this is not forced positivity. So I used an example once of an exploitive boss that I had, and someone from AA was like, well, hey man, don't you see that you're the problem? You've got a Mustang. Can't you focus on the things that are going right in your life? I'm sorry, but that does not fit, and that is not correct. The answer is emotional discipline without self-betrayal. You're allowed to see insanity clearly. You're allowed to be upset by someone with low effort and pass the buck behavior, performative customer service, and broken systems that make a competent person absorb the cost. You are allowed to value excellence, to move efficiently, to care about quality, to take pride in your own work and your own business, to dislike passive systems, and to expect other people to be accountable. All of that's fine. The work is keeping those standards from becoming contempt that takes over your body, tone, and the room. So a healthier endpoint sounds like, I maintain my standards without emotionally unraveling every time somebody else fails to meet them. That sentence is easy for me to record on a podcast, hard to live, and that's why I'm doing the work with my listeners. So you can file the complaint and then go home. You can ask for a manager without turning the employee into a symbol of cultural collapse. You can recognize low effort without needing to marinate in disgust for the rest of the weekend that leaves you and your partner disconnected. You can leave the store without needing everybody at Lowe's to admit the absurdity out loud and for you to get applause that you were right in the situation. The real work is learning how to differentiate inconvenience from true violation. Differentiate inefficiency from a personal attack, and to differentiate mediocrity from existential collapse. And maybe most importantly, how to stop using moral outrage as your primary source of stimulation and identity, because there's always going to be material. There's always going to be checked out teenager employees that are on TikTok that don't care, broken systems, nonsense policies, passive people, somebody going 65 miles an hour in the passing lane all the time until you are out of patience. The question is, how much of your life do you want to spend prosecuting it? The work is walking out of Lowe's without turning the plywood problem into a courtroom drama about civilization. It is in leaving DCF bureaucracy without carrying that same courtroom into every grocery line, return counter, and customer service interaction for the next 3 decades. Broken systems can bother you. Low effort can bother you. You can complain, escalate, leave, refuse to participate, and still keep your standards. you can also stop making every stupid process answer for the sins of humanity, and that is doing the work. Thanks for spending the time with me. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with somebody who may need to hear it. Be kind to yourself, be kind to people around you. Remember that we're all doing the best that we can with the tools that we currently have, and we're all capable of growing past that. If you'd like to reach out or connect, send me an email, brian@naplesintegratedrecovery.com. I hope to hear from you there. In the meantime, thanks again for listening. I'll see you on the next one.